Sometimes life puts us face to face with stories that seem to carry an impossible weight to ignore, stories where love and protection conflict with fear and guilt. This is one of those stories. Good evening, Dom. I'm sending this story because I need someone to hear what's trapped inside me. Maybe telling it is the only way to ease the burden I've been carrying for years. My name is Everaldo. I'm a simple man from a small town who struggles every day to provide for my family. Life has never offered me luxuries, but we've always had the essentials. My wife, Patricia, is my partner in everything, and together we raise our 2 children. Pietro, the oldest, has always been serene and introspective. Yasmin, on the other hand, was born with a unique energy that made her stand out from a very young age. Even as a baby, she drew attention wherever she went. When we took her to the little grocery store on the corner, everyone watched her with enchantment. Some of the older ladies would come over, compliment her beauty, and sometimes ask to hold her. As a proud father, I'd lift her in my arms so they could see her better. Although it often made me happy, I won't deny that other times I felt something strange. Perhaps a mixture of apprehension and a natural instinct to protect her. When Yasmin took her first steps, the neighborhood kids also seemed to notice something special about her. Sometimes they would hide their toys or tug on her braids just to get her attention. She would always respond with a smile or a contagious laugh, as if everything conspired to make her shine even more. The years flew by. Before we realized it, she was already in middle school. It was around that time I noticed that it wasn't just the younger kids who approached her anymore. Now there were also boys, and not just to play. Some brought flowers, notes, or candy. I'll never forget the day one of them showed up at our door. I answered, and the poor kid could hardly speak from nervousness. Patricia, standing behind me, just smiled discreetly. When I told Yasmin, she brushed it off, said it was nothing and that she wasn't even interested in the boy. In high school, things started to escalate. Suitors appeared with more sophisticated gifts, ranging from perfumes to a huge bouquet of roses she could barely carry. Although my daughter remained discreet, sometimes she seemed to enjoy the attention. She accepted invitations to go out, talked to them, and always kept her polite manner. I knew she didn't mean any harm, but as a father it wasn't easy to deal with. At first I felt jealous. It was hard to accept that my little girl was growing up and that others were noticing it too. Patricia, always calmer, tried to reassure me, saying it was natural and that Yasmin was just discovering this stage of life. Over time, I realized I couldn't fight against time. All I could do was guide her to make the right choices. Many nights my wife and I would sit with her to give advice on choosing her friends wisely, reminding her not to raise false hopes in anyone unless it was something serious. I insisted on honesty, saying it was important to be truthful and not play with other people's feelings. Yasmin, who was never very talkative, rarely answered, but her gaze showed she was listening. Sometimes she seemed to truly understand. Other times, she preferred not to dwell on the subject. As the years went by, I set my jealousy aside and understood that my daughter needed to face the world. My role wasn't to hold her back, but to prepare her for the choices she would make. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Seeing Yasmin learn, make mistakes, and try again taught me that children don't belong to us. Our mission is only to help them grow wings so they can fly. During high school, it was the local boys who tried to get her attention. However, when Yasmin left to study dentistry, news about her life became rarer. On the phone, her mother always asked how she was, if she had met anyone or started dating. The answer was always the same: nothing serious. She said she was focused on her studies. Still, I couldn't stop worrying. Patricia, with her usual calm, tried to reassure me, repeating that Yasmin knew how to take care of herself. Even so, in every conversation I made sure to warn her. I asked her to be careful, not to trust anyone blindly, and not to be fooled by charming gestures or words. I insisted that she look deeper, paying attention to the intentions of those around her. Yasmin, always patient, replied there was no reason to worry, assuring me everything was under control. A few years later, my daughter returned to our town, not because she had given up on her studies, but because she dreamed of opening her own dental office here. She came back determined, and that made me proud. Even though she was still reserved, something in her had changed. Her posture, her way of speaking, everything showed how much she'd matured in her time away. It was during this phase that she met Evandro, a man about 7 years older than her. I remember Patricia was the first to tell me. "It seems Yasmin is going out with someone," she said one evening while we were having dinner. "His name's Evandro, and he manages his father's ranch in the mountains." My immediate reaction was far from positive. From the start, just hearing his name felt strange. When I met him in person, my impression didn't improve. He was polite and courteous, but something in his eyes deeply unsettled me. Maybe it was paternal instinct or simple distrust, but I couldn't feel safe around him. Still, I avoided showing my feelings in front of Yasmin. The last thing she needed was to hear criticisms about someone who seemed important to her. Over time, it became clear my daughter was falling for Evandro. You could tell by the way she talked about him and by the sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned him. Patricia insisted there was no need to worry, saying Yasmin was mature enough to make her own choices. Still, I tried to talk to her subtly, looking for more information about that man. She always responded calmly, as if there was nothing wrong. At first, our routine didn't change much. Yasmin remained focused on her work at the office and kept her life balanced. But gradually, Evandro started to take up more space. On weekends, she went with him to the ranch, saying she needed a break and that the peaceful setting was good for her. We didn't question it, trusting her judgment. Even so, it was impossible not to notice that her time at home was becoming increasingly scarce. As the months passed, their relationship deepened. Evandro often picked her up at the office, and they spent a lot of time together. My wife said it was natural, that Yasmin was building her own life. Even so, I couldn't avoid the unsettling feeling that something was different. Soon they announced they were dating, and though I tried not to show it, I worried about how quickly everything was happening. Yasmin seemed enchanted, as if Evandro was everything she needed at that moment. A year later, they decided to get married. It was a simple ceremony here in town. Yasmin was stunning that day, dressed in a modest white gown. But what stood out most was her smile, filled with love and hope for the future. As I watched her, I couldn't help but think of the little girl I used to carry in my arms to the corner shop. Now she was beginning her own journey, away from us. After the wedding, my daughter began to drift away. At first, I thought it was normal, a period of adjustment to her new routine. But as time went on, it became clear something had changed. She hardly visited us, and when she did, she always seemed in a hurry, as if she was only doing it out of obligation. Patricia tried to explain her absence by saying Yasmin was busy with the ranch, the dental office, and taking care of the house. But I noticed more and more that she wasn't the same. The sparkle in her smile was gone. That contagious joy she always had now seemed like a distant echo. Her eyes showed exhaustion, as though they carried the weight of something she refused to share. Whenever we asked how she was, the answer was always the same. "I'm fine, Dad. Don't worry." But I knew that wasn't true. Her eyes, her hesitation to talk, everything betrayed that something wasn't right. One night, when Patricia and I were already in bed, we heard knocking at the door. I got up quickly and went to answer. There was Yasmin, standing on the threshold, looking tired, eyes swollen from crying. Before I could say anything, she spoke. "Dad, can I stay here tonight?" I had an argument with Evandro. I nodded without question. The next morning when we got up, Yasmin was already awake. She had helped her mother prepare breakfast and was acting like nothing had happened. I asked if she wanted to talk about what happened, but she said there was no need, that she would handle it herself. I didn't push. Patricia told me it was better to give her space, that Yasmin would come to us if she felt she needed to. That same day, Evandro came to pick her up. He knocked quietly, showing no sign of anger. Yasmin saw him through the window, grabbed her things, and left without a word. They seemed calm when they left, as if the fight the night before had never happened. It didn't take long before another late-night visit happened. When I opened the door, I found Yasmin again, but this time something was different. Her face was marked by a mix of rage and deep sadness I couldn't identify. She was visibly shaken, almost trembling. "We had a terrible fight at home," she said after a long silence. This time it was more serious and got out of control. We both got hurt. I defended myself, but I don't know how things reached this point. Her voice faltered, and she stopped talking, as if admitting it out loud took all her strength. A mix of fear and indignation overtook me. We couldn't ignore it anymore. The situation had become unsustainable, dangerous for both of them. When Yasmin calmed down a bit, I approached her. "Daughter, this can't go on. This isn't a good life for you or for him. You need to think about what you want and what you're willing to endure." She lifted her face. Her eyes held a complicated mix, sorrow and determination. "Dad, I'm not a child anymore. I know what I'm doing." The firmness in her words caught me off guard. Even so, as a father, I couldn't just accept what I was seeing. Yasmin was sinking into something that clearly hurt her. I felt Patricia's hand on my arm, silently asking me to stop, but the words came out before I could hold them back. "Yasmin, look at yourself. This isn't right. We can't keep seeing you come home more and more devastated. It's your life, but we're your parents, and it hurts us to see you like this." She stood up suddenly, her hands shaking, and locked her eyes on mine. "Dad, you don't understand. It's not that simple. I love him. Even when things get complicated, I believe we can overcome it. You just don't get it." At that moment, I realized there was a wall between us that I would never be able to cross. No matter how hard I tried, something deeper prevented her from letting me in. The following months were even harder. Things kept escalating until one day everything changed. It was late, and I was at home, focused on fixing an old bicycle. While adjusting the chain, the phone rang. I dropped my tools, wiped my hands, and answered. It was Yasmin. Her voice was different, weak, weighted by something I couldn't immediately name. "Dad, is Mom there?" she asked quickly. I explained that Patricia was at the market. There was a pause. Then she made a request that chilled me to the core. "Dad, I did something horrible. Please don't tell Mom anything. I need you, but promise you won't say a word to her." The anguish in her voice was palpable. I felt a coldness sweep through me. "Okay, daughter, I won't say anything. But tell me where you are. I'm coming right now." She hung up without giving more details. My heart racing, I grabbed the truck keys and left, the bike still unfinished. I drove toward the ranch, not knowing what to expect, but with a frightening certainty that something very serious had happened. When I parked in front of the house, I saw Yasmin at the door, motionless, but her eyes were restless, scanning the surroundings as if she was waiting for the unexpected. I got out and walked toward her. Her first question, in almost a whisper, was, "Did you come alone?" "Yes, daughter, I'm alone. What happened?" She looked around again as if to make sure we were truly alone and motioned for me to come in. As soon as I crossed the doorway, Yasmin threw herself into my arms. The impact was so sudden I nearly lost my balance. "Dad, I love you so much," she said, her voice broken by emotion. "Forgive me. I'm so sorry for being a bad daughter." As her words spilled out in fragments amid sobs and unsteady breathing, I tried to calm her. "My girl, it's all right. I'm here. I'm with you." But it was as if she couldn't hear me. Her grip grew stronger, almost desperate. Her hands clutched my shirt as if afraid I'd let go. I felt her entire body trembling, her sobs echoing through the room. I tried to stay calm, but with every second she was in my arms, it became clearer how broken she was. I tried to comfort her, but something drew my attention farther inside the house. Then I saw it. There was a body on the floor, near the bedroom door. At first I couldn't quite grasp what I was seeing, but the shape of the body made me stop. My entire body froze as a chill ran up my spine. From where I stood, I could see Evandro's torso. He was lying on his back, his shirt unbuttoned, his face pale under the weak light. Yasmin was still clinging to me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene. Something about his expression seemed wrong, almost empty, as if life had already left him. Realization hit me like a blow. He was no longer alive. For a moment, everything around me went silent. My voice came out low, almost a whisper. "Yasmin, what happened here?" She didn't answer. She just cried, making a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep, filled with pain and despair. "I couldn't stop it," she kept repeating, tears streaming down her face. With each word, she seemed to crumble further. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move. My feet felt rooted to the floor as my mind scrambled to piece together what was right in front of me. I looked at Evandro again, searching for any sign that maybe I was mistaken, that this was some terrible misunderstanding, but there was no doubt. He was dead. Yasmin trembled in my arms, clutching me as if physical contact could shield her from what had happened. She was mumbling disjointed phrases until she raised her face and said, through sobs, something that made my world collapse. "Dad, it was me. I'm the one who did this." The argument got out of control. I tried to calm him down, but now he has no pulse. Her words hit me with an unbearable weight. For an instant, I thought I had heard wrong. I looked at her, waiting for her to deny what she'd just said. But her eyes, filled with guilt and terror, told me it was true. My daughter, my Yasmin, had taken someone's life. Panic overtook me. My eyes darted between Evandro's body and Yasmin, who now looked like a frightened child, fragile and lost. "Dad, please help me." "I don't want to disappear," she said, her voice breaking at the end of the sentence, and her words cut through my chest like a blade. My mind was spinning. I thought about Evandro's family, his father and brothers, harsh and merciless people. I knew exactly what they could do if they found out. I had seen before how they dealt with situations like this. There would be no stopping them. My tears fell uncontrollably, but all I could do was hold her tight, pressing her to me while she cried. "Yasmin, listen to me. I need you to calm down. I'm going to help you, but I need you to tell me everything that happened." My voice was as shaky as my body, but I tried to sound firm. In that moment, I realized I would do anything to protect her. My fear was overwhelming, but my love for her was stronger. The next 2 months were utter chaos. Since that night, nothing had been the same. Not a day went by without the weight of what happened hovering over both of us. That night at the ranch, the first thing we did was try to stay calm, but it felt impossible. While we cleaned the place, my mind wrestled with the harsh reality of what I had witnessed. Yasmin put on a perfect performance. That afternoon, she left the house wearing clean clothes, as if nothing had happened, and went into town. There, she asked around about Evandro with convincing concern. Anyone would believe it was genuine. Had I not known what really happened, I'd have believed her too. But nobody knew anything. When she came back, she said everything was under control, but her eyes couldn't hide her fear. For 3 days, everyone in town believed Evandro was missing. During that time, rumors took shape, as always. Some swore he had gotten into a pickup truck with some people from the mountains, suggesting he'd been hired for a job and left without telling anyone. Others claimed to have seen him at the park with another woman, as if he was running away from something. None of it was true. Meanwhile, Yasmin maintained her flawless act. She visited Evandro's parents' ranch, appeared troubled, and asked about him with genuine concern. She did it so naturally that if I hadn't known the truth, I'd have thought she was truly worried. Patricia, confused, asked if I thought he had run away or if something serious had happened. I could barely respond. Seeing my wife made me feel like a traitor. 3 days later, the news arrived. Evandro's body was found in the river, caught among branches near a bridge. The current had carried him there. Hearing that, I felt as if something was crushing my chest. I knew what had happened, but hearing the confirmation out loud forced me to face the truth. My wife broke down in tears upon hearing the news. Yasmin, however, collapsed onto the floor, covering her face with her hands and sobbing in what seemed like profound anguish. The entire town showed up for the wake. Evandro's family held the ceremony at the ranch following tradition. There were prayers, soft music playing in the background, and food for those who came to pay respects. Yasmin remained there the whole time, speaking with everyone, thanking them for their support, playing the part. Meanwhile, I kept repeating silently that she acted out of desperation, that everything got out of hand. But inside, I wondered if protecting my daughter was the right choice, or if by doing so I was allowing something worse to fester. In the weeks that followed, something about Yasmin unsettled me. She seemed too natural. She talked to people, thanked them for their condolences, and wept beside anyone who embraced her. But at night, when the house was quiet, I found myself thinking about the girl she used to be. That special light that once shone inside her now seemed gone, replaced by a mask she'd learned to wear all too well. Even as time passed, Yasmin kept visiting the ranch. She said she wanted to make sure everything was in order, though Patricia and I knew there wasn't much to do there. It seemed like the ranch had been frozen in time since Evandro's death. Sometimes she'd ask me to go with her, and I would. I couldn't leave her alone, but being there was unbearable. On one of those visits on our way back, Yasmin finally broke the silence. "Dad, you have no idea how hard it was living with him." Hearing that, I felt a knot in my stomach. Her words carried enormous weight, but I stayed quiet. There were days when I reached my limit. He treated me like an object, someone who only served to follow his orders. But I loved him so much I thought I could endure it. I thought it would all be worth it. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper to herself. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to hide the tension in my body, waiting for her to say more. For a moment I thought she would open up completely, but her tone changed. It became colder, sharper. "He deserved it, Dad. He always thought he could control me, that I'd put up with anything. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to let him. I couldn't let him." I avoided meeting her eyes. I kept them on the road, but I felt my hands tremble and my heart pounding erratically. I'd never felt anything like it. It wasn't just fear of what she'd done, but fear of how she seemed to deal with it. There was no crying, no regret, just a disturbing firmness in her voice. After what happened with Evandro, his family distanced themselves from us. There were no fights or direct accusations, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. His mother avoided us whenever we crossed paths in town. In her eyes there was the certainty that Yasmin was guilty, even if she never said it out loud. Rumors spread, fueling resentment. There was no proof, but the silence around us was suffocating. As days turned into weeks, my daughter threw herself into her work at the dental office. Patricia said that was good, that keeping busy might help her move on. I wasn't so sure. One afternoon, arriving home, I found my wife in the living room. She was pale, agitated, her hands fidgeting with her apron. Before I could ask, she came closer. "Everaldo, we need to talk." Yasmin told me something strange. She said she saw Evandro today at the office. My body went rigid. "What do you mean she saw Evandro? What are you talking about?" My voice came out harsher than I intended. She was cleaning the instruments when she noticed someone standing in the corner, the area where she does dental cleanings. She thought it was someone else, but then realized it was him. She said he had no teeth and his mouth was completely dark, filled with something viscous, some dark liquid that dripped down his chin and stained his clothes. He was covered in mud, like he'd come out of the river. His shirt was wet, torn, and she swears she smelled damp earth like river soil. He didn't say a word, just stared at her. Patricia paused as if she needed to catch her breath. Yasmin ran to the truck. Luckily, there was no patient waiting. When she got here, I had to give her a sedative to calm her down. My wife's eyes brimmed with fear and unease. The description was so harrowing and detailed that I couldn't help but picture the scene. In my mind, Evandro, or what remained of him, stood there in that dental office, his mouth black and the liquid dripping. A chill ran down my spine. After that day, something inside Yasmin truly began to unravel. She tried to keep up with her routine, but it was obvious something was very wrong. We started noticing odd behavior. Late at night, we heard slow footsteps around the house, as if she was wandering aimlessly, trying not to make noise. One night, I couldn't take it anymore and got out of bed. I found her in the living room, quietly sitting on the sofa. I asked if she was all right, but she only muttered that she couldn't sleep and quickly changed the subject. There was something in her eyes that deeply unsettled me, a blend of fear and exhaustion I had never seen before. Despite trying to seem normal, the signs were increasingly evident. She barely touched her food, her dark circles were deep, and her skin was so pale it was almost translucent. One evening, after hearing her complain non-stop about headaches and frayed nerves, I suggested we go to the pharmacy. She got into the car in silence, hands trembling as she stared at her lap. We didn't say a word the whole drive. I wanted to break that oppressive silence, but the look on her face stopped me. At the pharmacy, I waited in the car while she went in. Through the glass, I watched her move slowly along the aisles, almost dragging her feet. When she came back, she sat next to me in the passenger seat. The moment I turned the key in the ignition, she broke down. "I can't do this anymore. I can't go on." Tears were streaming down her face before I could react. Suddenly, she hit her hands against the seat so hard it startled me. Her breathing became quick and ragged. "He won't leave me alone, Dad. Ivandro is still here. He's with me all the time. No matter where I go, he shows up. And the smell, that damp smell like the river when they found him, is on me, on my clothes, on my skin. I can't get rid of it. Her voice shook as she continued. This didn't start now. Days ago, when I was driving to the ranch by myself, I felt something heavy on my shoulders, like two huge hands pressing down. I knew I shouldn't, but I looked out of the corner of my eye anyway. He was there, in the seat next to me. She swallowed hard, barely able to speak. It was a big man, just a shadow, but I knew who it was. I couldn't see his face, but I felt it. It was Ivandro. He was breathing heavily, like he was watching me. I wanted to pull over to run away, but I couldn't. It was as if my body wouldn't respond. Then I felt something cold touch my ear. A slow touch, trailing down to my earlobe. Yasmin shuddered at the memory. He used to do that when he'd lie next to me on the couch. My whole body got goosebumps like I'd lost control. But the worst was the smile I felt on him, like he was enjoying my fear. It wasn't just an impression, Dad, it was really him. He was in my car. Her breathing was unsteady and shallow. When I tried to touch her hand, she pulled away, even more frightened. Each word was spoken with a conviction that terrified me. It didn't seem like delusion or simple panic. She truly believed what she was saying, and the more she spoke, the more I started to believe it too. Nights, which were already difficult, became unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ivandro on the floor of that house, the scene that would never leave my mind. I couldn't escape the memory of what I did to help Yasmin cover everything up. It weighed on me like a crushing burden. I had become an accomplice. Regret consumed me. Until one afternoon she came to me with a low voice. Dad, I can't go back to the ranch. Please go in my place. See what's still in the boxes in the bedroom. I didn't want to go, but the fear in her eyes convinced me. The drive felt endless. The air was heavy, and the silence tormented me. When I reached the ranch door with the key in my hand, I tried to summon my courage. Before putting it in the lock, I heard a soft, rhythmic sound like wood creaking. A chill ran down my spine. It was the sound of something swaying. My mind immediately went to the hammock in the living room, the one Ivandro used so often. But the house was locked. It was impossible for anyone to be inside. My muscles tensed, but I finally turned the key. The dry click of the lock echoed in my ears, and I pushed the door slowly. It creaked, a long, hollow sound, as if the whole ranch was warning me. The noise I'd heard outside continued, unrelenting. My heart thundered in my chest as my eyes, almost against my will, landed in the center of the living room. There was the hammock gently swaying as if an invisible breeze was pushing it. On it, a figure, wearing a cap tilted over his face, hiding his identity, but I knew I didn't need to see to know who it was. Something in that presence told me he was waiting for me. Forgive me, I murmured, voice tight, as if speaking to a living person. Forgive me, Ivandro. Forgive me for what my daughter did. I'm sorry for how it all ended. My words hung in the air unanswered. I felt a heaviness in my chest, an invisible force pressing me as though wanting me on my knees. Tears streamed down my face as I pleaded, I never wanted it to end this way. Never. The figure remained still, but the hammock's movement abruptly stopped, as if the very air had frozen. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. I had the distinct feeling those eyes beneath the cap were watching me, piercing my soul. I couldn't bear it. Unable to keep looking, I turned around sharply and shut the door behind me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I got into the truck. I started the engine and sped away, my heart racing. Tears blurred my vision as I drove back. After that day, my nights became unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that living room, the hammock swaying gently, and the figure sitting there, waiting. In my nightmares, he lifted his head, the cap fell away, and a face with no features turned toward me. I tried to scream, to move, but terror paralyzed me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, breathing hard. A few days later, something happened that shattered our family completely. Yasmin was at her dental office trying to get back to her routine when someone suddenly came in without warning. They didn't say a word. They just threw acid in her face. The liquid burned her skin instantly. My daughter's screams echoed beyond the office, drawing people who tried to help. But it was too late. The assailant fled without looking back, disappearing into the streets like a ghost. When we got to the hospital, Patricia and I were on the brink of despair. They rushed Yasmin to the emergency room while the doctors scrambled to stabilize her. Her cries of pain echoed down the hallway, and all I could do was stand there feeling my world crumble. They told us the acid had hit much of her face. The burns were severe, and even though they did everything they could, they made it clear she would never look the same again. That night they allowed me to see her. I barely recognized her. Her face was wrapped in bandages, and her breathing was heavy, interrupted by weak sobs. I approached her with uncertain steps, trying to remain steady, but every movement felt like it was tearing me apart. As I held her hand, a silent rage took hold of me. I had no proof, but I was sure it was Ivandro's family's doing. Maybe his mother, or one of his brothers, or even a distant cousin. It didn't matter who, it came from them. They didn't need words to show their resentment, they just waited for the right moment to take back what they believed was owed. Transitioning from hospital to home was harder than any challenge we'd imagined. After endless weeks of surgeries and intensive care, the doctors said she was ready to leave. But I felt no relief, only a greater weight than before. Our days at home became a heavy routine of constant pain and unrelenting care. The acid had left deep, irreversible marks. The doctors had treated the burns, but the scars were more than skin deep. Patricia and I clung to an invisible strength, trying to be pillars for Yasmin even when our own exchanged glances showed sorrow and helplessness. At first she tried to be strong. She said she would move on, that she wouldn't let the scars define her. Sometimes she even seemed to believe it, but her voice lacked the same conviction as before. Over time, her energy faded. Yasmin began to isolate herself, hiding away in her room. She only went out for medical appointments, and even those were a struggle. The stares of pity and curiosity weighed her down. One day, the house was unusually quiet. Patricia and I had left early to go to the market. We asked her to come with us, insisted she get some fresh air, but she declined. "I'm not feeling well, Mum. I'll stay here." When we returned, everything seemed in place. Patricia headed straight to the kitchen to put the groceries away, and I set the keys on the living room table. I decided to go upstairs to see her. There wasn't a specific reason, just a nagging worry that wouldn't let me be. The hallway was silent. I knocked lightly on the door, calling her. "Daughter?" I waited for a sign, a soft response, or even the sound of sheets shifting. Nothing, only silence. I thought maybe she was sleeping, but something felt off. Without overthinking, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Light from the hallway partially lit the dark room, the curtains drawn to keep out the sunlight. I saw her outline on the bed, perfectly still. At first glance, everything looked normal, but something made me hesitate. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking closely, and called out again, now with my voice trembling. "Daughter?" I gently touched her arm. That's when I realized. Her skin was cold, unmoving. Everything around me seemed to stop. My heart pounded, and a desperate cry left my lips as I called for Patricia, even though I already knew what had happened. My greatest fear was there in front of me, taking shape. It's been 2 years since that afternoon, 2 years since we found our daughter in that room, surrounded by a silence that still echoes in my life. 2 years since she left us, overwhelmed by the weight of everything she carried. I knew she couldn't take it anymore. I saw it every day in her eyes, the way she avoided mirrors, the deep sighs she thought no one heard. Guilt consumed Yasmin completely. Fear followed her like a shadow, an unerasable memory. Even though she never said it openly, I knew she still saw Ivandro. For her, he never left. I think about it constantly. Every day I wake up with my chest tight, as if an invisible hand is pressing on it. The house is emptier, wrapped in a silence with no end. Patricia tries to move on. She talks with the neighbors, goes to the market, sticks to routine as best she can, as if it could fill the void Yasmin left. But I know she also feels the pain, even if she hides it. The difference is that she doesn't carry the same weight as I do. Because I know what I did. I remember every detail of how I became an accomplice that night at the ranch, when my daughter asked for help and I never hesitated. I did it because it seemed right, because a father's love blinded me. But by helping her, I gave her the tools to bear a burden that ultimately destroyed her. Now, I replay every choice, every word spoken or left unsaid. I can't admit this to anyone. I didn't admit it then, and I can't admit it now. I'm a coward. Not because I evade justice, but because I can't face Patricia's gaze, the memory of Yasmin, the idea that my love condemned her when it should have saved her. I still wake up at night in a cold sweat, heart pounding, wondering if this torment will ever end. I never say it out loud, but I know, deep down, I can't take it anymore. The guilt is suffocating me, crushing me, and sometimes I can barely breathe. I try to find some solace in small things, the flowers I bring to her grave, the whispered prayers in the quiet of the night. But none of that is enough. After 2 years, there are still nights when it feels like it all happened yesterday. There are still days when her footsteps or her laughter in my memory is so vivid, I almost feel her presence. And then reality hits. She's no longer here. And what hurts the most is knowing that in some way, I was part of what took her away. Before we get to the last story, if you're still here, let me know what time you're watching in the comments. I love seeing who sticks around until the end. Let's not stop now. On to the next. My name is Marcia. I lead a modest life free of major complications. I work at a shopping mall in Mexico City in a department store. I've never considered myself someone who believes in superstitions or anything out of the ordinary, but what I experienced completely changed my way of thinking. It all started when I began this job. The environment was normal, although the competition among co-workers was noticeable. At first, I didn't know anyone and felt out of place, until I met Eduarda. She was the kind of person who radiates friendliness from the very first interaction. On my first lunch break, she invited me to sit next to her in the cafeteria and was kind to me from that moment on. Over time, we developed a great friendship. We spent a lot of time together, both at work and outside of it. At first, it was comforting to have someone I could trust, but gradually, I started noticing behaviors that unsettled me. For instance, shortly after we met, she came to work with a haircut exactly like mine. I thought it was a coincidence and didn't give it much thought. One day during a break, Eduarda talked about her relationship with Deborah, our supervisor. She said they used to be very close, but since Deborah's promotion, their friendship had cooled. Eduarda seemed resentful, saying Deborah had grown distant and no longer had time for her. Although her tone was full of hurt, I thought it was just venting. However, what she said next alarmed me. Eduarda mentioned she was thinking of teaching Deborah a lesson. At first, I didn't understand what she meant, until she mentioned something related to witchcraft. I laughed nervously and told her she shouldn't joke about that kind of thing. She responded with an enigmatic smile, saying it wasn't anything serious, just something to set things right. Even though I tried to brush it off, it stayed on my mind. A few weeks later, Deborah started missing work. According to the manager, she was dealing with health problems. When I last saw her, she looked exhausted, frail, and could barely stand. I suggested she see a doctor, but she said she couldn't, as she needed to work to take care of her sick mother. It broke my heart, but there was nothing I could do. What disturbed me most was Eduarda's reaction to the situation. She seemed pleased, and I vividly remember a satisfied smile when we learned Deborah would be out indefinitely. It was the first time I felt genuine fear of Eduarda. Something about her gave me chills, and I began to question whether our friendship was safe. Shortly after, I noticed Eduarda becoming even more involved in my life. When I mentioned my desire to take an English course for better opportunities, she offered to sign up with me. I found it odd, but let it slide. Over time, her insistence on being part of everything I did started to bother me. Then one day, during an apparently casual conversation, Eduarda revealed something that froze me to the core. She admitted she was responsible for Deborah's health issues. She said she had performed a ritual to punish her for her ingratitude. The calm tone in which she spoke caused me to panic. From that moment on, I began to distance myself from Eduarda gradually, ensuring she wouldn't notice. My instincts told me it was dangerous to confront her directly. Deep down, I feared that if I wasn't careful, I might be her next target. After that revelation, I worked hard to keep our interactions strictly professional. However, the more I tried to pull away, the more Eduarda insisted on getting closer. She suggested outings and activities as if nothing had changed, and I struggled to find a way to decline without arousing suspicion. Meanwhile, Deborah remained absent from work. Although we weren't close, I worried about her health. One day, the manager announced that Deborah had decided to resign. I wasn't entirely surprised. Between her health issues and her responsibilities caring for her mother, it seemed she had no other choice. However, what truly upset me was Eduarda's reaction. She displayed an almost calculated relief, as if everything was going according to her plan. With Deborah gone, the manager began to rely more on Eduarda, and before long she was promoted. To many, the promotion seemed fair since Eduarda had been there for years. But I knew there was more to it. Eduarda proudly told me she had convinced the manager she was the best candidate for the position. Although she didn't say it outright, her insinuations about her relationship with him made me suspicious of the methods she had used to secure the role. Meanwhile, my life started to unravel in inexplicable ways. Since I began distancing myself from Eduarda, everything seemed to go wrong. My work performance plummeted, and I started making mistakes I'd never made before. These mistakes were deducted from my salary, causing financial strain. Additionally, the opportunities I sought outside the company simply vanished. I sent out numerous resumes, and despite my background and skills, I received no responses. It felt like every door was closed. One day, while organizing products, the new supervisor approached me. He mentioned noticing my drop in performance and asked if something was bothering me. Despite trying to hide it, I knew something was wrong. It felt as though a shadow followed me, blocking every path I tried to take. That's when I decided to seek help. A co-worker, noticing something strange was happening to me, suggested I visit a healer in a nearby neighborhood. Initially, I was skeptical, but I felt I had nothing to lose. The healer, a woman named Donna Regina, welcomed me with a calmness that immediately reassured me. I barely needed to explain my story. It seemed she already understood what was happening. Donna Regina said someone close to me was blocking my path. This person, she explained, didn't want to destroy me, but wanted to keep me under control. They envied my potential and feared I would move on and leave them behind. Every word from Donna Regina resonated with what I had been experiencing. Without me saying anything, she described Eduarda in detail. She explained how Eduarda created obstacles to prevent me from progressing, not out of pure malice, but to keep me within her orbit. Then Donna Regina gave me a Saint Benedict medal and advised me to wear it at all times, even while sleeping. She assured me the medal would be enough to break Eduarda's hold on me. That night, when I got home, I put the medal on a chain and wore it around my neck, just as Donna Regina had instructed. I don't know if it was my belief or the medal's protection, but from then on, things began to change, albeit gradually. Doors that once seemed closed started to open again. After receiving the medal, my life began to take an unexpected turn. The changes were subtle at first. My performance at work improved, the frequent mistakes disappeared, and my relationships with colleagues became more harmonious. The constant feeling of being suffocated, which had seemed ever present, lifted as if a heavy burden had been removed from my shoulders. Eduarda remained in her position as supervisor, and, although she tried to maintain the same level of closeness, I avoided any interaction that wasn't absolutely necessary. I felt more confident and determined, but I was careful not to draw too much attention to myself or raise her suspicions. I didn't want her to realize how much I knew. A few weeks later, I received a call from one of the companies I had sent my resume to. They invited me for an interview. I was thrilled, but decided not to tell anyone, especially not Eduarda. On my day off, I went to the interview, and surprisingly, it went better than I had expected. I received an offer almost immediately. This was my chance to finally leave and start over, far from everything that had happened. But before making a decision, something unsettling happened at work. The manager who had promoted Eduarda started showing the same symptoms Deborah had experienced before resigning. At first, it was just headaches and nausea, but his health deteriorated rapidly and soon he stopped coming to work. Not long after, he resigned without providing much explanation. The new manager, a woman named Giselle, came from another branch. Unlike her predecessor, Giselle had a firm and straightforward approach. She quickly identified flaws in how Eduarda managed the department, and although she didn't openly criticize her at first, it was clear she was dissatisfied with Eduarda's performance. For the first time, Eduarda seemed vulnerable, her authority being questioned. Meanwhile, I focused on my future. Once I received the formal offer for the new job, I handed in my resignation. The relief was immense, but I knew I had to tread carefully until my last day. When I informed Eduarda of my departure, she tried to convince me to stay, saying we could become even closer. I politely thanked her, but internally didn't trust a single word she said. Shortly before my last day, Eduarda did something that confirmed all my fears. She sent me a message insisting that we meet outside of work, claiming she needed to discuss something important. I hesitated, but eventually gave in to her persistence. We met at a nearby cafe where she made a confession that chilled me to the bone. "I noticed you've been pulling away, and it made me feel insecure. I only wanted the best for you, but I was afraid you'd forget about me. So, I used some methods to ensure you'd stay close to me." Hearing those words, I realized Eduarda had been manipulating me all along, not just emotionally but in other ways as well. What was most unsettling was her tone. Eduarda spoke as if her actions were entirely justified, with no remorse or acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. To her, everything was motivated by the fear of being alone. I left that cafe feeling relieved that my time at that job was coming to an end. I finally saw Eduarda for who she really was and understood the urgency of distancing myself from her. On my last day, I experienced a mix of relief and tension. I said warm goodbyes to the colleagues I had a good relationship with while keeping my distance from Eduarda. She attempted to organize a farewell gathering, but I politely declined, citing other commitments. My new job brought a renewed sense of hope. The environment was more professional and focused, and gradually, my life began to regain balance. However, Eduarda didn't give up so easily. In the first few weeks, I received numerous messages and calls from her. At first, I responded politely, but as her persistence grew, I decided to cut all contact. One day, when I got home, my family told me that a woman had come looking for me. She claimed to be my close friend and insisted she needed to speak with me. I had no doubt. It was Eduarda. The fact that she knew where I lived deeply unsettled me. I changed my phone number and started avoiding places she was familiar with, trying to protect myself. Despite these precautions, I still felt like I wasn't free. Eduarda seemed to find ways to infiltrate my life. One day, while leaving work, I thought I saw her silhouette across the street. I couldn't be sure, but the mere thought was enough to send me into a panic. I hurried home and spent hours reflecting on how to deal with the situation. A few days later, a co-worker from my new job mentioned that someone had been asking about me at the office. They didn't leave a message, but the description matched Eduarda. This confirmed my suspicions. I wasn't safe yet. I decided it was time to seek Donna Regina's help again. I recounted everything that had happened since our last meeting, including Eduarda's persistence in staying connected to my life. Donna Regina listened attentively and explained that a more intense ritual of protection was necessary. According to her, Eduarda had established an energetic bond with me, and unless this connection was severed, I would never be completely free. The ritual required specific items: a recent photo of Eduarda, a red ribbon, and a black candle. Finding a recent photo seemed impossible, but I remembered some old group photos from work on my phone. I found one where we were together and decided to use it. On the night of the full moon, I prepared the ritual as instructed by Donna Regina. I placed the photo in the center of a circle of salt, lit the black candle, and wrapped the photo with the red ribbon while reciting the prayers she had taught me. According to her, this would sever the bond Eduarda had created with me and shield me from further manipulation. During the ritual, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if an invisible force was resisting. Still, I followed each step carefully, trusting the process. When it was over, Donna Regina burned the photo while reciting a final prayer. emphasizing the importance of avoiding any contact with Eduarda from that moment on. Even the smallest interaction could reignite the bond. In the days that followed, things finally began to calm down. I received no more messages or emails, and I started to believe I was finally free. However, a lingering sense of unease remained, as if deep down I knew Eduarda wouldn't give up so easily. Sometime later, I began receiving persistent calls from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the caller continued for days. Eventually, I blocked the number, but the fear that it was Eduarda haunted me. One night when I arrived home, I found a folded note pinned to my door. There was no sender. When I opened it, my heart raced. The message said I wouldn't be able to escape her so easily and that somehow we would be together again. There was no signature, but I didn't need one to know who had sent it. The fear I had worked so hard to overcome returned with full force when I found that note. I decided to keep it to myself, not telling my family or colleagues to avoid worrying them further. Still, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I sought out Donna Regina once more. I visited Donna Regina again, carrying the note as evidence that Eduarda was still present in my life. She examined it with a somber expression and sighed deeply. "This confirms what I feared," she said. "Eduarda's energy is still clinging to you. Some people, when they lose control over others, grow desperate and escalate their actions, even spiritually." She recommended a final definitive ritual to sever any remaining ties between us. This ritual would be more intense and required a neutral space, far from places where Eduarda might have left her energy. It would also demand my complete focus and trust in the process. On the appointed night, I accompanied Donna Regina to a remote hill on the outskirts of the city. We brought all the necessary items: my St. Benedict medal, a white candle, a small vial of holy water, and coarse salt. Donna Regina drew a large protective circle on the ground and placed me in its center with the candle. She then began chanting prayers in a steady, rhythmic voice, creating an atmosphere both eerie and calming. As the ritual progressed, I felt a strange weight lifting from my chest, as though an invisible force was being pulled away. The air grew dense, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers around us, though no one else was there. When the ritual ended, I felt a deep sense of relief and lightness, as if I'd finally been freed from an unseen chain. "This is it," Donna Regina said with certainty. "The bond has been broken. From now on, Eduarda won't be able to harm you either physically or spiritually. But remember, you must avoid all contact with her, no matter how small. Any interaction could reignite the connection." I returned home feeling exhausted but peaceful. That night I slept better than I had in months. Over the following weeks, my life seemed to stabilize. There were no more messages, no strange calls, and no signs of Eduarda. It was as though she had vanished completely. One morning, while browsing the news, I came across a headline that stunned me. "Local woman arrested for stalking and manipulation." I opened the article and saw Eduarda's name. According to the report, she had been caught harassing another individual, crossing boundaries she could no longer conceal. This time, her actions had legal consequences. The news brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. Eduarda's obsession had consumed her entirely, leading her down a path of destruction. While I felt safer knowing she was detained, I couldn't help but feel pity for the person she had become. I chose not to delve into the details of her case. My focus was on moving forward, rebuilding my life and leaving the past behind. However, the emotional scars from my experience with Eduarda lingered, reminding me of how deeply her influence had affected me. Months passed, and I found stability in my new job. To my surprise, I was promoted to a position I had never imagined myself in. It felt like all the difficult decisions and challenges I had faced were finally bearing fruit. While I remained cautious about new relationships, I also began to trust people again, carefully setting boundaries to protect myself. One day, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I came across a group picture from my previous job. There she was, Eduarda, smiling in a way I once interpreted as genuine warmth. For a brief moment, I reflected on everything I had endured and how much my life had changed since then. But I didn't feel fear or anger. Instead, I felt gratitude for the strength I had found to escape her grasp and for the lessons that experience had taught me. Without hesitation, I deleted the photo. That simple act felt symbolic, like closing a chapter that no longer had any power over me. My life had moved on, and while some memories lingered, they no longer held me captive. I had learned to protect myself not only from harmful people, but also from my own tendency to ignore warning signs. I understood that often the biggest threats come from our inability to set clear boundaries. Today, my life is filled with new opportunities, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, and shaped by a future I am building with care and dedication. Though I'll never forget the ordeal with Eduarda, I know I've emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to create a life free from fear and manipulation. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.